over the years we have seen that defense security is not an insecurity for us. But the second big insecurity for us always has been the food deficit. We have perennially been food deficit country. There are a lot of people I see in 60s here, they would remember that PL 480 wheat which we imported in India, which was like the wheat which was not supposed to be eaten by human beings. US as a charity gave to India so that Indians can have at least one meal in a day. We were like that in 1960s, and where we have come today, we have a food surplus in India. I mean, you look at cereals, you look at dairy, you look at pulses, you look at like horticulture, fruits, vegetables, everything. We have a surplus in India, and it's a dramatic shift that has happened over the years. And it's despite the fact that we are not using the best of technology, despite the fact that our farms are very, very small today and we are not really investing much. Imagine where we would be in a few years' time. So one of the biggest insecurity as a nation that we had, food security, that we have achieved, and it's a dramatic shift that has happened to our country. Of course, there is one more insecurity we still have, is the energy. We are not self-sufficient in energy. Every time oil prices go up, we are vulnerable, and hopefully I sense that after defense and food, I think the next target for the next government would be how do we get energy security in India, and that reduces our vulnerability to rest of the world. So that's a very, very important thing that has happened in India. But you know, the important aspect about this food security is all of us have been a beneficiary of lower food prices, but as it has impacted the incomes of 500 million people, 50 crore people who are dependent on income from agriculture. Their incomes have gone down, and that's why you see all this rural distress. That's why you see this PM Kisan and Nyay and all of those things, because when you have created the food security, you have actually reduced the income of 500 crore people effectively. And there is no way the earlier responses like a minimum support price बढ़ा दो या कुछ lower, उससे कुछ नहीं होने वाला है. Fact is that we have more surplus. Even if you grow more, I mean, prices are going to be lower. You cannot make money in agriculture. Agriculture has to change dramatically. तो क्या करेंगे इन 500 करोड़ लोगों का? I mean, the only way is you pull these people out of agriculture in next several years. But उनको suddenly आप mutual fund advisor नहीं बना सकते overnight. जो आज farming कर रहा है उसको you cannot make him a mutual fund advisor overnight. You have to reskill them. It will take a long process. Till such time, and I have a very strong view on this, which is not the view by most of the people in the market and business community. Every time something like a PM Kisan is done, people say बड़ा populist कर दिया या ये तो election के लिए. We have no option but to give them hard cash for some time. And then, as I said, that no farmer wants his next generation to be on the farm. They want these kids to get educated and move somewhere else. But for a generation, we have no option but to do that. But the other interesting thing is, because we know that the farmers where like 500 crore people are there, you won't be able to really grow their incomes, and whatever anybody says that will grow double the farmer's income, but that can only happen if you move a lot of farmers outside the farm, and very few people will be left in the farm. Till such time, there is no option but to give hard cash. Another interesting thing that has happened in India in last few years is, as I said, that you have to get these people out, but then these people will remain in the rural India, and you have to do something similar, which is the last period where India was growing at 9-10% growth rate for like almost 5-6 years. You remember that? Which is the period where India was growing at the rate of 9-10%, which is the highest growth rate in our history, 2004 to 2008. Like for 5 consecutive years, we grew at a rate of like 9% plus. And I keep thinking why that happened. Of course, every economy in the world was also growing at a higher rate. But something interesting happened in the 5 years before that. And that was we invested heavily in roads. We invested heavily in telecom. That's when the mobile phones and this whole telecom revolution came. And that's when we invested very heavily in electricity, in rural electricity. And that has a multiplier effect. All of these things have a multiplier effect, and India was growing. Something similar has happened in last few years. There is a renewed, on the electricity side, on the road side, on the telecom side, and I'll talk about this whole data thing. And that gives me confidence that maybe the growth rate can increase in next few years, and of course the rural India can also do well but it has to be outside the agriculture, not in the agriculture alone. The last thing I'll talk about, I mean, I just want to give you some bigger picture that you don't lose sight when you see this whole noise around. There'll be some expert who will come on TV because, you know, you got this government or you got majority or minority or coalition, or this is what has happened in US, or this is what the US Federal Reserve is doing, and that's why market will go up or go down. You don't lose sight of that bigger picture. One of the interesting thing, as I told you about those 4 Ds, is the digitalization, which is the most powerful force, even more, as I said, that democracy, demographic demand. It's just unbelievable. We don't realize what's happening in India. We always say that India is the most, one of the most illiterate country on planet Earth. We are like probably one of the most illiterate country in the world. And I say that we will become the most literate country in the world in few years' time. If you know how to operate a smartphone, then you are literate. If you don't, then you are illiterate. That's the world today. Think about it. When you bought your first, you'll remember that when you bought your first television or washing machine and VCR, उसमें 3 या 4 ही बटन होते थे, बस 30 पेज का मैनुअल आता था. अपने को इतना डर लगता था एक बटन को आगे पीछे करने में, वो 30 पेज का मैनुअल आता था साथ में. I mean, that's how we have, actually people have forgotten, कैलकुलेटर के साथ भी एक मैनुअल आता था. कैसे होगा when I was a small kid and the first calculator came, मेरे को डर लगता था उसमें यार कुछ गलत बटन नहीं प्रेस हो जाए. And then where we have come today, I mean, because of the smartphone, I mean, suddenly it has completely changed. I mean, the way you govern, I mean, the last mile delivery, several things can change so dramatically. Businesses can change so dramatically in next few years. The way you deliver healthcare, the way you deliver education. So a lot of people are worried about, let's say, the PM Kisan and some of these schemes which are being talked about. But if you use the GEM Trinity properly, जनधन योजना हर एक का बैंक अकाउंट है जो आधार से लिंक्ड है और एक मोबाइल फोन से लिंक्ड है, then you don't have to worry about, I mean, the money gets transferred to the right person. There are a variety of things that can happen. It can increase India's tax revenues because now the entire GST is online. Everybody has to file returns online. Think about in few years time, it will become so damn tough, and then you have satellite imaging, then everybody's got a mobile phone, and with the data, it will become very tough to deal in cash or anywhere. It has not happened so far, maybe in last few years, but I think the building blocks have been put in place. So digitalization has the ability to really change India in a very, very dramatic fashion over the next several years. So these are some of the bigger picture we should not lose sight of. In last few years, a lot of interesting reforms have happened. If I ask you which is the biggest reform that has happened in India in last 4, 5, 6 years, which one you will talk about? और GST. So GST normally सब लोग बात करते हैं. What else? और कोई बड़ा रिफॉर्म इंडिया में जो हुआ? IBC बहुत बड़ा रिफॉर्म है. इंडिया में कभी प्रमोटर ने नहीं सोचा कि मतलब I'll be thrown out of my company, let's say a Bhushan or an SR or a demonetization is still debatable. But IBC is like too big a reform. GST is too big a reform. It will take time for it to settle. People have forgotten how many years we took when we moved to SENVAT, how many years we took when we moved to VAT. But because of that, the revenues have gone up so much. And now we are moving towards GST, which is like mother of all taxation reforms. What else? Online internet. So उसकी वजह से 400 million people, 40-50 करोड़ लोगों के बैंक अकाउंट ही नहीं खुलते अगर आधार नहीं होता. तो बहुत सारी चीज़ें हो गई. डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफ़र आधार उनकी वजह से 70-80,000 करोड़ रुपीस गवर्नमेंट का बच रहा है because the money is getting credited directly to the beneficiary account and it's not getting leaked in the system. What else? इंटरनेट मार्केटिंग. सो डिजिटलाइजेशन में वो सब कुछ आ गया. जनधन योजना, मोबाइल, आधार एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट. व्हाट एल्स है जी? Yeah, the health scheme. So this is like very, very big thing that has happened. So overall social security net that has come in India, I'll talk about it. What else? Any other reform that comes to mind? RERA is such a big reform. आप में से कितने लोग हैं जो equity market में invest करते थे 80s में, 90s में, जिनको हर्षद मेहता बुल मार्केट याद है? अरे बहुत लोग हैं. So you remember 3% ब्रोकरेज लगती थी, पता है? सब ब्रोकर. एंड देन वो भी आपको पता नहीं होता था. आप अगले दिन कोई स्टॉक का प्राइस देखोगे, कोई भी, ऐसे ही नाम ले रहा हूँ, कोई भी एक ऑर्के का प्राइस देखोगे, पेपर में प्राइस आएगा, जो भी आप व्यापार या भाव कॉपी खरीदते थे, ₹16, ₹18, ₹16, ऐसा पेपर में, न्यूज़पेपर में प्राइस आएगा। जब भी खरीदोगे तो 18 पे ही वो परचेज होगा, जब भी बेचोगे 16 पे ही होगा। मैं ब्रोकर को बोलता था कभी बीच में भी तो एक ट्रेड होता होगा, बट दैट्स हाउ आवर मार्केट्स वर। उसके बाद वो डिलीवरी आती थी और वो डिलीवरी को ट्रांसफर में भेजते थे, 6 महीने तक ट्रांसफर होके नहीं आता था शेयर, एंड उसके बीच में भाव 18 का 36 हो जाता था, अपने को अच्छा लगता, चलो पैसा डबल हो गया अपना। और जब डिलीवरी अपने हाथ में आती थी तब भाव वापस 16 का ही मिलता था। मतलब ऐसे स्टॉक मार्केट थे। आई थिंक रियल एस्टेट मार्केट हैज बीन exactly like that, but RERA will change. It will be unrecognizable in few years time. People haven't seen the full impact of RERA, what kind of transparency it can bring to real estate market. So that's a big reform. What else? है जी, डिमेट तो हो गया, 20 साल पहले हो गया। What else? और कोई बड़ा रिफॉर्म? म्यूचुअल फंड का SIP से ओवरऑल फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन, EPFO ने इन्वेस्ट किया, आई मीन पेंशन फंड का मनी कभी था नहीं इक्विटी में, वो चालू हुआ। What else? है जी, पेंशन, वो सोशल सिक्योरिटी नेट, आई टॉक अबाउट इट लिटिल लेटर। है जी, sovereign gold bonds, so gold market भी चेंज होगा, पैन कार्ड एंड सम ऑफ दोस थिंग्स। आई थिंक a similar transparency will come. है जी, NCLT is that IBC. What else? Infrastructure, couple of areas where investments have happened. What else? All the, sorry? टैक्स रिटर्न, वो अगले साल होएगा। सो दिस इज इनडायरेक्ट का GST, द डायरेक्ट टैक्स का, द गवर्नमेंट ने जो अनाउंस किया है दैट इन 24 आवर्स योर रिटर्न गेट फाइल्ड एंड सम ऑफ दोस, इट शुड बी अ वेरी बिग। व्हाट एल्स? कुछ हुआ नहीं प्राइवेटाइजेशन में, सो आई कांट से दैट एज रिफॉर्म। व्हाट एल्स? इज अ मैसिव थिंग एक्चुअली। सो हमेशा आई थिंक दैट इंडिया में जॉब्स नहीं क्रिएट हो सकते मैन्युफैक्चरिंग से, बिकॉज न्यू एज मैन्युफैक्चरिंग डजंट नीड सो मच ऑफ लेबर, इट हैज़ टू बी क्रिएटेड in the services side, and इंडिया का सबसे बड़ा अपॉर्चुनिटी है फॉर एग्जांपल इन टूरिज्म। हाउ विल यू गेट टूरिज्म? यार आप कैसे लाओगे? इंडिया में कम टूरिस्ट आते हैं बाली के कंपैरिजन में, या बैंकॉक के कंपैरिजन में, या इस्तांबुल में लोग ज़्यादा जाते हैं, पूरी कंट्री में इंडिया में कम आते हैं उनसे, simply because we are not clean, we don't have infrastructure. So we underestimate the impact of that, we underestimate the impact of this on health of people and variety of things. So it's a big reform. What else? ये मैं सब जगह करता हूँ इन्वेस्टर्स फोरम में, इन लोग ये सारे लिस्ट करते हैं। मेरे ख्याल में सबसे बड़ा जो रिफॉर्म हुआ है ना, वो कोई भी नहीं बोलता है कभी भी, एंड आई हैव डन दिस इन, है जी, वो तो हो गया IBC, वी हैव डिस्कस, है जी, चेंज ऑफ गवर्नमेंट किधर? है जी, हाँ, बट मैं आपको बोल रहा हूँ कोई भी नहीं पहुंचेगा वहां तक। द बिगेस्ट रिफॉर्म इन लास्ट 5 years इज मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी कमेटी फ्रेमवर्क, where Reserve Bank of India and Government of India have signed through a statute that RBI की responsibility है इंडिया में consumer price inflation 4% रहेगा, and if it is above 6% or if it is below 2%, then they are responsible and they have to give a rationale why inflation is not at 4%. It's a big change that has happened in India which is underestimated. आप लोग जब 9-10% पे FD लगा रहे थे, 8% पे FD लगा रहे थे, तब इंडिया में 8-9-10% का इन्फ्लेशन था, आपका एक्चुअली पैसा बढ़ ही नहीं रही था। अभी आप FMP कर रहे हैं या कोई भी एक बॉन्ड फंड में भी लगा रहे हैं या लिक्विड फंड में भी लगा रहे हैं, जो आपको अगर 6-7% आ रहा है और अगर इन्फ्लेशन 4 है तो आपको 3% का रियल रिटर्न मिल रहा है, आपकी वेल्थ ग्रो हो रही है। और अगर इक्विटी में 12% मिल रहा है तो दिस इज 8%, 7% रियल रिटर्न, विच इज़ अ वेरी वेरी बिग थिंग। इंडिया की हिस्ट्री उठा के देख लो, हर 3-4 साल जब हम ग्रो करेंगे लोअर इन्फ्लेशन, बट देन इन्फ्लेशन विल गो अप वेरी सब्सटेंशियली, तो हमारे साथ जो इकोनॉमिक साइकिल भी एकदम शॉर्ट हो जाते हैं उसकी वजह से। ये एक बहुत बड़ा रिफॉर्म हुआ है, एंड फॉर इन्वेस्टर्स नथिंग इज मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट देन दिस रिफॉर्म, दैट इफ यू हैव अ फेथ that over the next several years and several decades, the government and the Reserve Bank are committed that inflation in India, and that's a consumer price inflation, वो कोई core inflation है ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, consumer price inflation which includes everything, by the way, 50% is food, then education, healthcare, everything is there. People debate कि यार मेरे को तो नहीं लग रहा है 4 हो गया, मेरे को तो 10% लग रहा है, but धीरे धीरे वो चेंज होगा। So अगर 4% इन्फ्लेशन है और अगर आपको 8% अगर AAA बॉन्ड्स में मिल रहा है, यू आर एक्चुअली मेकिंग 4% रियल रिटर्न विच यू आर नॉट मेकिंग अर्लियर एज एन इन्वेस्टर इन फिक्स्ड इनकम, एंड इफ यू आर मेकिंग 12% इन एक्विटी पीपल यूज्ड टू थिंक मेरे को 20% रिटर्न चाहिए, बिकॉज इन्फ्लेशन ही इतना ऊपर था। दिस वॉज द रीजन वी वर इन्वेस्टिंग इन रियल एस्टेट एंड गोल्ड, बिकॉज लगता था यार इन्फ्लेशन से ज़्यादा रिटर्न आता है, बिकॉज इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से ही करेंसी भी डेप्रिसिएट होती थी, गोल्ड का प्राइस डॉलर से लिंक्ड होता है। But if you bring down inflation, then you'll feel very comfortable. यार कोई भी अच्छा fixed income fund में 7-8 भी मिल रहा है, 6 भी मिल रहा है, it's a very good return. And equity में if I'm making 10-12, it's a very, very good return. And it's very good for the economy and structural macroeconomic stability. And because of all of these reforms, without getting too much into it, we spend good time. 5 things will happen in next few years. Number 1, a large part of the black economy will shift to mainstream. People won't be able to stop it regardless of which party comes to power. Over a period of time, with all of these things, a bigger part of the economy will shift to the mainstream economy and come out of the black economy. When that happens, ऑटोमेटिकली गवर्नमेंट के टैक्स रेवेन्यूज बढ़ेंगे. इंडिया की गवर्नमेंट वर्ल्ड की सबसे छोटी गवर्नमेंट्स में से है. हम लोग कंप्लेन करते हैं बाबू नहीं है. बीएमसी में जितने एम्प्लॉयज़ हैं इन द टोटल बीएमसी के एम्प्लॉयज़, सो लेट्स से अगर एक बराबर सिटी ले लो बॉम्बे की, न्यूयॉर्क, उनके फायर डिपार्टमेंट में उनसे बहुत ज़्यादा एम्प्लॉयज़ होंगे compared to let's say the total employees of BMC. And that's true of nurses, doctors, engineers, everything in India. Our government is very small because we don't have the tax revenue. So when tax revenues go up, government will spend more on social infrastructure, on physical infrastructure. The third thing will happen is all of these will make doing business easier and easier. हर चीज़ ऑनलाइन हो गई. आपने पासपोर्ट बनवाया होगा 10 साल पहले, आपको पता है पैसा देना ही पड़ता था ब्रोकर को, उसके बगैर बनेगा ही नहीं, वो आपको 4 बार वापस भिजवाएगा, बाहर खड़ा रहेगा सर, आप तीसरी बार आपको देख रहा हूँ, मैं आपका 7 दिन में बनवा देता हूँ. Today there is no, I mean you go there and everything is completely online. No broker can enter a passport office today and everything will change accordingly. So ease of doing business. Fourth will be macroeconomic stability, because अगर आपका inflation controlled है then everything else and the fiscal control है then automatically there will be stable macroeconomic environment. And the fifth big thing is what I call financialization of savings. People, the savers, people like you and me, will be more comfortable putting money for long term in equity market, in bond market, which is very important for India. Why it's important? आप 20-25 साल की हिस्ट्री उठा लो, हर 3 महीने मतलब हर क्वार्टर का इक्विटी मार्केट का रिटर्न देख लीजिए. जिस क्वार्टर में फॉरेन इन्वेस्टर्स ने इन्वेस्ट किया उसमें मार्केट ऊपर गया, जिस क्वार्टर में FII ने बेचा उसमें मार्केट नीचे चला गया. वी हैव ऑलवेज बीन सो वल्नरेबल टू foreigners' money. Why? Because domestic people like you and me have not been investing, but it's changing now with 8,000 crores in SIP, which is growing every day, with EPFO and other pension funds investing. That's changing quite a bit, and it can provide a lot of macroeconomic stability, financial stability to India. So that's the impact of all of these reforms over the next few years, and nothing of this is going to change regardless of which party or which coalition comes to power, because in India you go back in history since 1991. Reforms have been incremental, have never been reversed by the next government. You know, one of the most interesting thing when I travel overseas, I tell people it's a one country where there's almost a consensus on economic policies. There is very little difference in economic policies across all party lines. Everybody knows that we have to grow at a higher rate. Everybody knows that private sector has to play a bigger role. Everybody knows that we have to open up a lot more. Since 1991, we have been opening up more and more to foreign investors. Everybody knows that the government's role has to be to encourage the private investment, foreign investment. The only little bit of difference is there on the distribution of that growth. Somebody will say put a little more focus on distribution. Somebody will say no, the higher growth itself will take care of the distribution. Otherwise, more or less, we are across party line. There is not a single reform in last 5 years which has been tabled in Lok Sabha has been rejected on economic bill. There is no economic bill which has been defeated by any party. Every single bill we discussed about GST, IBC, RERA has passed by 100% consensus. Leftist of the left parties or the most right party, everybody has voted for it. This is very, very interesting thing about India. The last thing I want to talk about is something. So मैंने बहुत सारी अच्छी चीजें बोल दी. कुछ risk भी होगी इंडिया की. The 4 or 5 risks for India are not the one that you hear on Times Now or Republic TV every day. None of those are actually a challenge or a problem for India. The 3 or 4 biggest challenges for India for next 10, 20, 30 years is, and if you are in business, in any kind of profession, you keep in mind the number 1 is climate change. I think we have, whether it's an air pollution, water pollution, we are a water stressed country, the soil quality is deteriorating. That's a real challenge for India, we underestimate it. But this will also encourage a lot of other investments and could actually turn out to be an interesting thing. The second is inequality. As I told you that somebody in a small village in UP is seeing the lifestyle that we are living here. And in a democratic setup, you cannot continue like that. You have to have a lot more equal opportunity in the society. And something very interesting has happened in India, and this I call India's own version of universal basic income. There is a lot of this discussion around minimum, whatever, somebody calls it Nyay, somebody calls it PM Kisan plus something else. You see over the last few years, you start with the NREGA, free LED bulb, free toilet, free LPG cylinder, something for PM Kisan, something for girl child, something for maternity, something for senior citizens. Now there is this pension for the unorganized labor. What all of this put together is, it's India's universal basic income. As long as you deliver it with Aadhaar, Jan Dhan Yojana and mobile, and you deliver it properly, there are no leakages. This is a wonderful thing that has happened in India. With medical insurance, with a proper social security net, think about it, 50, 60 crore people in India are not in a position to consume anything today. They just live on bare like subsistence. I mean, the minimum amount of, they're just surviving. But when you provide them this social security net, there is a toilet, there is an LPG cylinder, there is an electricity with a bulb. You have told them that, boss, if there is somebody sick in the family, you don't have to worry about it. You have a little bit of pension and all of those things. Then things can change very dramatically over a period of time. We all talk about the demographics in India, but unless we provide a basic social security net, the demographic actually can become a disaster. And this is something very interesting that has happened in India. And I always, and this again, every time something like this happens and people criticize, this is very populist and this is very, government kya kar rahi hai, but I'm a strong believer that something like this is very important. In a country like ours, you need to have some bit of the social security net and inequality. But still, I mean, if we don't provide it properly, then it can be a risk from a society perspective. So climate change, inequality, we are still not as innovative. The third is, I think, lack of innovation. We don't invest in as much as in R&D, and that's why our imports from China have grown like 5-6 times in last 10 years. मतलब वो गणेश जी आपकी राखी वो सब भी China se aati. We need to invest a lot more and become a lot more efficient and productive as a society. The fourth actually, which is a very recent, and I don't know whether it is a structural trend or a more recent phenomena, is there is a decline in India's savings rate. So I told you people are investing more in the mutual funds and all, but actually India's savings rate is going down. Maybe there is a new generation which has more aspiration and they don't probably appreciate as much about the importance of longer term savings, but we need high savings also in a country like India at our stage of growth. So these are, and of course I talked about the energy security over a longer period. These are some of the challenges that I look at. Most of the other challenges that you hear on TV on a day-to-day basis, they are not actually a big challenge for the India. So as an investor, I told you that if we have a structural growth story, if you have a situation where corporates are able to participate in that, and as an investor you are able to participate in that growth story, it's an I keep saying that, I mean, India is going to create a biggest economic miracle in the history of mankind, because in a democratic setup not many countries have done what we have done. Not many countries have created the institutions that we have created at such a poor society. And I think there is a great opportunity for all of us, even on, as I said, I mean, that's on the equity side and even on the fixed income side with a 4% inflation. I mean, over the next several years, if both government and RBI